Hey everyone, settle in close tonight as we drift back nearly 2,000 years to the eternal city at the height of its power. You're about to spend one ordinary day with Marcus, a plebeian shopkeeper navigating the chaos, commerce, and community of ancient Rome. Ordinary meaning cramped apartment living, fermented fish sauce on everything, and streets so dangerous after dark, you'd rather face a gladiator than walk home alone. Fair warning, you probably won't survive his schedule with your modern sensibilities intact. So before we step into those leather sandals, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. While you're at it, drop your city and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's tuning in from Melbourne to Montreal, Tokyo to Timbuktu. Now dim those lights, maybe grab something comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together through the streets, shops, and bathhouses of Imperial Rome. The first shaft of pale light creeps across the Tiber, painting the great aqueducts in shades of amber and rose. Dawn comes early to Rome, and with it, the city begins its daily symphony. But you're already awake, roused not by the sunrise, but by the relentless cacophony of urban life bleeding through thin walls. Wooden cartwheels clatter over cobblestones below. A baker's oven roars to life 3 floors down, sending waves of bread-scented heat rising through the insula. Somewhere, a baby wails. Somewhere else, a couple argues in rapid-fire Latin about money, always money. A rooster crows from a courtyard you can't quite see. Its enthusiasm mocked by the screech of a merchant already hawking yesterday's fish at discount prices. You share this small room, this single cramped space on the 4th floor of a towering apartment building, with Marcus and his small family. The ceiling is low enough that Marcus, a man of average height by Roman standards, must duck when he moves near the sloped rafters. The floor is uneven packed earth covered with rush mats that have seen better years. There are no windows, just a small opening high on one wall that admits a square of morning light and an equal measure of street noise. The walls, thin timber and mud brick, plastered over with crumbling white lime, do nothing to muffle the thunderous footfalls of the family upstairs or the shouting from the apartment next door, where someone is, judging by the volume, either dying or being born. This is an insula, one of Rome's towering apartment buildings that house the vast majority of the city's population. The word literally means island, and these structures rise like islands from the packed urban landscape, some reaching 5 or 6 stories high, despite laws meant to limit their height. They're everywhere, dominating the cityscape, outnumbering the grand villas of the wealthy by something like 30 to 1. By some estimates, there are over 46,000 insulae scattered throughout Rome, housing perhaps 700,000 people or more. These buildings are Rome's answer to its explosive population growth, a pragmatic, if often dangerous, solution to the problem of fitting 1 million souls into a city that was never meant to hold them all. The ground floor of Marcus's insula houses a row of shops, their wooden shutters already clattering open to greet the day. You can hear the wine merchant below arguing with a supplier about barrel quality. The smell of olive oil from the shop next door mingles with less pleasant odors, the ever-present reek of the chamber pots being emptied into the street-level cesspit. The acrid tang of smoke from cooking fires, the accumulated mustiness of too many people living in too small a space. The insulae, for all their necessity, are notorious for their dangers. Fire is the constant spectre, wood and fabric and oil lamps creating a perfect recipe for catastrophe. Collapse is equally common, hastily constructed buildings thrown up by profit-minded landlords who cut corners on materials and foundations. There are stories, whispered over wine at the thermae, of entire buildings pancaking in the night, burying sleeping families beneath timber and tile. Marcus stirs on his thin mattress, little more than wool stuffing, sewn into rough cloth and laid across a wooden frame held together with hemp rope. The rope creaks with every movement, a sound so familiar it has become part of the apartment's nighttime music. Beside him, his wife Lucia shifts, pulling their threadbare blanket tighter against the early morning chill. Their 2 children sleep on similar pallets across the room, their small forms curled like cats. There's no privacy here, no separate bedrooms or quiet corners. Life in an insular apartment means living perpetually in the company of others. hearing every sound, knowing every secret, sharing every breath. He rises slowly, joints protesting the cold and the hard mattress. At 35, Marcus is already feeling the weight of his years, the accumulated toll of a lifetime spent carrying heavy goods, standing behind his shop counter and climbing 4 flights of narrow stairs multiple times each day. There's no wash basin in the apartment, no running water at all on these upper floors. Water, that most basic necessity, must be carried up from the public fountain 2 streets over, hauled in heavy clay amphorae that leave your arms burning and your back aching. It's work usually done by women and slaves, but sometimes Marcus makes the trip himself, navigating the pre-dawn streets with careful steps, alert for the gangs that prowl the darkness. This morning, mercifully, there's still water in the large storage jar that sits in the corner, enough for a quick splash on the face and hands. The water is tepid and slightly stale, but it serves. Marcus cups his hands, brings the water to his face, and feels the fog of sleep wash away. The water leaves his skin feeling gritty, the limestone deposits from the aqueducts mixing with the dust that seems to coat everything in Rome. He dries himself with a square of linen cloth that has been washed and re-washed until it's soft as silk and nearly transparent with age. Breakfast, that first meal Romans call ientaculum, is a simple affair. Lucia has already risen, moving quietly so as not to wake the children, and she produces their morning meal from a wooden cupboard that holds their meager collection of dishes and food stores. There's yesterday's bread, a dense loaf of dark grain that was cheap at the market. The kind of bread that fills your belly even if it threatens to break your teeth. She tears it into chunks and sets it on a clay plate. There's cheese too, hard goat cheese with a sharp tang that makes your mouth water. A handful of olives from a clay jar, their salty brine a wake-up call more effective than any trumpet. And wine, always wine, though this early morning vintage is heavily watered down, more water than wine really, just enough to make the questionable fountain water safer to drink and give the day a gentle beginning. Marcus eats standing up, as he often does, leaning against the rough plaster wall while morning light strengthens in their small square window. The bread is tough, requires real work to tear and chew, but it's filling and wholesome enough. The cheese provides protein, the olives salt and oil. This is how most Romans begin their day, not with elaborate spreads or hot dishes, but with simple portable food that can be consumed quickly before the day's work begins. The wealthy might add honey or dates, figs or cold meats, but for a shopkeeper's family, bread and cheese and olives constitute a perfectly adequate start. As Marcus chews, he mentally reviews the day ahead. His shop, a small taberna on the ground floor 2 buildings over, sells pottery and small household goods, the kind of practical items that every Roman family needs. Clay lamps, cooking vessels, storage jars, the occasional bronze implement if he can afford to stock it. Business is steady, if not spectacular, enough to pay the exorbitant rent on the apartment and the shop, enough to keep his family fed and clothed, with perhaps a few bronze coins left over each month to save against catastrophe. He's a plebeian, a common citizen, neither patrician aristocrat nor slave, existing in that vast middle ground where most Romans spend their lives. Before leaving, Marcus performs a ritual as automatic as breathing. In one corner of the apartment, mounted on a small wooden shelf, sits the lararium, the household shrine. It's a modest affair, just a niche in the wall really, decorated with a faded fresco depicting the lares, the protective household spirits, and the penates, the guardians of the family's food stores. These gods are the most intimate deities in the Roman religious landscape, not the grand public gods of temple and state, but personal, familial, immediate. Marcus lights a small oil lamp before the shrine, its flame steady in the still air. He murmurs a brief prayer, asking for the protection of his family, for good business at the shop, for another day without catastrophe. The prayer is not elaborate, no formal incantations or lengthy supplications. Just a few sincere words spoken in the presence of the gods who share his home. Lucia joins him at the shrine, adding her own prayer, her voice barely above a whisper. The children sleep on, oblivious, as their parents begin the day with this small act of piety. Religion in Rome is not confined to temples and festivals, though those certainly exist. It permeates every moment, every action, woven into the fabric of daily life, so completely that it becomes nearly invisible. You pray before meals, before journeys, before important business transactions. You make offerings at crossroads shrines, at neighborhood temples, at the household lararium. The gods are everywhere, watching, judging, ready to bless or curse, depending on whether you've kept your side of the bargain, maintained the pax deorum, the peace with the divine. Dressed now in his work tunic, a simple woolen garment belted at the waist, Marcus prepares to face the day. The tunic is practical, comfortable, worn soft through countless washings. It reaches to just above his knees, the standard length for a working man. A toga, that elaborate draped garment that marks citizenship, hangs unused in the corner. Togas are for special occasions, for appearances in court or attendance at public ceremonies. No one wears a toga to work, especially not the kind of work Marcus does, standing behind a counter all day, handling dusty pottery and negotiating prices with penny-pinching customers. His feet go into sturdy leather sandals, their soles worn smooth by miles of cobblestones, but still serviceable. A small leather pouch containing a few bronze coins and a key to his shop goes into a pocket sewn into the tunic's folds. The door to their apartment opens directly onto a narrow landing and the communal staircase, a treacherous affair of worn wooden steps that groan and shift under your weight. 4 flights down, each step a negotiation between speed and safety. The stairwell is dark, illuminated only by whatever light filters in from the street below and the occasional small window cut into the exterior wall. The smell intensifies as you descend, each floor adding its own contribution to the aromatic symphony. Cooking odors from the 2nd floor, where an old widow spends her days making barley soup to sell by the bowl. The sharp ammonia stench of urine from the communal latrines on the 3rd floor landing, a smell so powerful it makes your eyes water. The yeasty warmth of the bakery on the ground floor, a welcome counterpoint to the less pleasant fragrances. Marcus emerges onto the street just as the sun clears the eastern hills, sending shafts of golden light down the narrow canyon between buildings. The street, barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass, is already alive with activity. A stream of humanity flows in both directions, people heading to work, slaves running errands for their masters, women making their way to the public fountains with water jugs balanced on their heads or hips. A litter bearing some wealthy patron glides past, carried on the shoulders of 4 sweating slaves, the occupant hidden behind curtains of expensive fabric. Shopkeepers throw open their wooden shutters, the sound echoing down the street like a drum roll announcing the day's commerce. The streets of Rome are an assault on the senses, a chaotic mixture of sound, smell, sight, and motion that never entirely ceases. Merchants hawk their wares in voices trained to cut through the din. A baker shouts about his fresh bread, still warm from the oven. A wine seller offers samples, his assistant pouring tiny measures into cups for passers-by to taste. A fishmonger, his cart loaded with the morning's catch from Ostia, calls out in a voice like gravel, advertising mackerel and sardines, eels and mullet, his goods displayed on a bed of seaweed already beginning to smell ripe in the growing heat. The streets are paved, at least in this neighborhood, with large, irregular stones that shift and rock under your feet. In poorer districts, the streets are often nothing but packed earth that turns to soup when it rains and billows dust when it's dry. The Roman morning streets are also treacherous in ways that have nothing to do with uneven paving stones. Human waste from chamber pots is sometimes simply thrown from upper-story windows. The residents above shouting a warning, "Aqua!" If you're lucky, nothing at all if you're not. You learn to walk close to the buildings, under the slight protection of overhanging upper stories, and to keep your ears sharp for suspicious sounds from above. Wagons are banned from the city center during daylight hours, a law meant to ease congestion, but the narrow streets are still jammed with foot traffic, with handcarts and litters, with merchants wheeling their goods on 2-wheeled dollies, with livestock being driven to market, bleating and lowing and contributing their own fragrant additions to the street surface. Marcus navigates this chaos with the ease of long practice, dodging a man carrying a ladder on his shoulder, stepping over a pile of something best left unidentified, nodding to neighbors he recognizes. The baker waves from his shop front, flour dusting his arms to the elbows. The wine merchant is already locked in fierce negotiation with a supplier, their voices rising and falling in practiced patterns of offer and counteroffer. Two women gossip at a fountain, their water jugs temporarily forgotten as they discuss the latest scandal involving someone's daughter and a gladiator. A dog of uncertain parentage trots past, looking purposeful as though it has somewhere important to be. Crime is a constant concern, especially as you move through the poorer neighborhoods where desperation drives some to violence. Pickpockets work the crowds, their fingers quick and skilled, targeting anyone who appears distracted or prosperous. Muggers lurk in the more deserted alleys, waiting for the careless or unlucky. The night is worse, far worse, when gangs roam freely and even citizens of some standing might find themselves robbed, beaten, or worse. There's no police force in Rome, no organized law enforcement patrolling the streets. The vigiles, technically firefighters, offer some nighttime security, but they're spread thin across a city of 1 million souls. Most Romans simply try to avoid trouble, walking in groups when possible, staying alert, keeping valuables hidden. Marcus reaches his shop without incident, a journey of perhaps 5 minutes that crosses the invisible boundaries between neighborhoods, each with its own character and reputation. His taberna sits at the corner of a busy intersection, a prime location that costs him dearly in rent, but ensures a steady stream of potential customers. The shop is small, perhaps 10 feet wide and 15 feet deep, with a high counter across the front that can be closed off at night with heavy wooden shutters that lock from inside. Behind the counter, shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with his inventory of pottery and household goods. Clay lamps in various sizes, some plain and utilitarian, others decorated with scenes of gods or gladiators or erotic encounters that make customers giggle. Cooking pots and storage jars, amphorae for wine and oil, small personal items like perfume bottles and hairpins, even a few more expensive bronze items, locks and hinges and decorative fittings for furniture. He unlocks the shutters and swings them open, propping them back against the building's exterior wall. Light floods into the shop, revealing the neat organization of his stock. Everything has its place, each item carefully positioned to catch the eye of passers-by. This is his domain, his little kingdom, the fruit of years of hard work and careful saving. He didn't inherit this shop or the business. His father was a carpenter, a skilled craftsman, but not a wealthy one. Marcus learned the pottery trade as an apprentice, spent years working for others, saved every coin he could spare, and finally, 5 years ago, scraped together enough money to lease this space and stock it with goods purchased from artisans and workshops around the city. The Roman economy, for all the grandeur of the empire, runs on countless small transactions, like the ones Marcus facilitates every day. The wealthy might conduct their business in grand forums and basilicas, dealing in shipping contracts and loans, imports from Africa and exports to Gaul. But the majority of commerce happens in small shops like this one, plebeians buying and selling the everyday necessities of life. The empire's prosperity, its legendary wealth and power, is built on this foundation of ordinary citizens working, trading, making, selling. As morning progresses toward midday, customers begin to trickle into Marcus's shop. A housewife needs a new cooking pot, her old one cracked beyond repair. She examines several, holding them up to the light, tapping them with her knuckle to judge the clay's quality by the sound it makes. She haggles over the price, as everyone does, starting at half what Marcus asks and gradually working toward a middle ground they can both accept. This negotiation is not hostile but almost ritual, a dance where both parties know their steps. Finally, they agree on a price, coins change hands, and she leaves with her new pot, seemingly satisfied despite having paid more than her opening offer. A slave arrives on an errand for his master, requesting 3 oil lamps for a dinner party tonight. Marcus selects his nicest examples, lamps decorated with intricate designs, more expensive than the plain variety, but appropriate for a wealthy household. The slave examines them critically, as though he's spending his own money rather than his master's, then nods approval. He pays without haggling, slaves usually don't. They're simply following instructions and carries the lamps away carefully wrapped in cloth. The Forum, that great beating heart of Roman public life, is where Marcus and countless others gravitate as the morning wears on. The Roman Forum proper, the Forum Romanum has evolved far beyond its original purpose as a simple marketplace. It remains a center of commerce, yes, but it's also the nucleus of political, religious, and social life. A space where all Romans, regardless of class, mingle and mix. The Forum sprawls across a large rectangular area between the Capitoline and Palatine hills, a jumble of temples, basilicas, monuments, and open spaces that has grown organically over centuries, rather than according to any grand plan. The market stalls that still occupy portions of the Forum sell everything imaginable. Food vendors offer prepared meals, cold meats and cheese and bread, fruit and nuts, sweet honey cakes and savory pastries. Spice merchants display their exotic wares, tiny piles of pepper and cumin and cinnamon, luxuries imported from the far reaches of the empire and beyond. Book dealers sell scrolls, both new texts and well-worn copies of classics, philosophy and poetry, histories and technical manuals. There are fortune tellers and astrologers ready to divine your future for a few coins. Barbers set up impromptu shops, shaving customers right there in the Forum while discussing the latest political scandals. Money changers sit at their bancas, those simple the small joys of being an ordinary Roman citizen in the greatest city the world has ever known. The rhythms of Roman religious life weave through every aspect of daily existence. Impossible to separate from commerce, family, leisure, or work. For Marcus and his fellow citizens, religion is not a once-a-week affair confined to specific buildings and occasions. It's a constant presence, a lens through which all of life is viewed and understood. The gods are real, immediate, demanding, and when properly appeased, generous. They're also numerous, almost absurdly so, with deities governing every aspect of existence, from the grand and cosmic to the trivial and mundane. The household gods, the lares and penates that Marcus honors morning and evening at his lararium, are just the beginning. There are gods for every neighborhood, every crossroads, every bridge and gate. There are gods of agriculture and war, love and death, wisdom and folly. There are the great public gods whose temples dominate the skyline, Jupiter Optimus Maximus, king of gods, whose massive temple crowns the Capitoline hill. Juno, his consort, Mars, god of war, especially revered in a military empire. Venus, goddess of love, claimed by the Julian family as their ancestress. Minerva, goddess of wisdom and crafts. Neptune of the seas, Ceres of the harvest. The list goes on, incorporating not just Rome's original deities, but gods absorbed from conquered peoples, Greek gods renamed but essentially unchanged, Egyptian gods like Isis finding devoted followings, mystery cults from the East promising salvation and afterlife. For ordinary Romans, engaging with this divine multiplicity means constant small acts of piety. You say a prayer when leaving home. You make an offering at a neighborhood shrine when you pass it on your way to work. You participate in festivals, Rome's calendar packed with feast days and holy days, some major citywide celebrations, others small local affairs. You consult augurs before important business decisions, paying to have birds' flight or sheep's entrails examined for divine signs. You make vows to gods, promises to erect a small dedication or make a special offering if your prayer is answered. The religious calendar structures the year in ways that the purely secular dates of consuls' terms and tax periods never could. There are festivals in honor of specific gods, celebrations that often last multiple days and involve the entire city. The Saturnalia in December, when social norms temporarily invert and slaves dine with their masters, gifts are exchanged, and the usual rigid hierarchies relax. The Lupercalia in February, an ancient fertility festival whose exact rituals are mysterious, but definitely involve nudity and running and hitting women with strips of goat hide to promote fertility. The various triumphs and games, spectacles where military victories are celebrated, and the people are entertained at public expense. Many of these festivals include days off from work, though what constitutes work can be flexibly defined. The baths remain open, obviously. Food vendors continue selling, though perhaps with reduced hours. The temples themselves become centers of activity, with special sacrifices and ceremonies, priests performing ancient rituals handed down through centuries. For the faithful, which is to say for nearly everyone, these are important occasions. chances to demonstrate piety, to fulfill obligations to the gods, to participate in the communal religious life that helps bind Roman society together. Sacrifice is the central act of Roman religious practice, the primary way humans communicate with and honor the divine. Sacrifices range from the simple to the spectacular. At the modest end, you might burn a pinch of incense at a household shrine or pour a libation of wine onto the ground. These small offerings, easily incorporated into daily routine, keep the relationship with the gods current, the lines of communication open. At the other extreme are the great public sacrifices, massive affairs where entire herds of cattle are slaughtered before the gods' temples, the meat distributed to the assembled crowd, a rare treat for common citizens who seldom taste beef otherwise. The sacrifice itself follows strict protocols, centuries of tradition codifying exactly how it should be done. The animal must be perfect, without blemish, a worthy offering to the divine. It's led to the temple, often garlanded with flowers, sometimes with horns gilded. A priest says the proper prayers, asking the god to accept this offering. If the sacrificer is wealthy or of high status, he himself might perform the ritual slaughter, though usually this is done by trained temple attendants. The blood is caught in bowls and offered to the god, poured onto the altar. The internal organs, especially the liver, are examined by trained augurs for signs of the god's pleasure or displeasure, favorable or unfavorable omens that might influence important decisions. The meat, that's the interesting part for common citizens. After the gods receive their symbolic portion, usually bones and fat burned on the altar, sending savory smoke heavenward, the rest of the animal becomes food for the people. This is one of the few times many Romans eat meat, especially expensive meat like beef. The crowd that gathers for public sacrifices does so partly from piety, certainly, but also from the practical knowledge that there will be free food afterward. The priests portion out the meat, and citizens carry their shares home, a windfall that might feed a family for days. For Marcus, religious life means balancing personal piety with practical concerns, engaging with the divine while also managing the demands of business and family. He's not particularly devout, not given to mystical experiences or deep theological pondering, but he's also not skeptical or dismissive. The gods exist, everyone knows that, and they must be honored. To fail in religious obligations is not just impious, it's dangerous, potentially bringing divine wrath not just on yourself, but on your entire family, perhaps even on the city as a whole. Romans are deeply superstitious, seeing omens and portents everywhere, interpreting everyday occurrences as messages from the divine realm. An owl hooting in daylight. Bad omen. Finding a coin on the street. Gift from Mercury, god of commerce and luck. Tripping on your way to an important meeting, sign that the gods disapprove of your plans, maybe you should reschedule. It seems exhausting to modern sensibilities, this constant vigilance for signs and wonders. But for Romans, it's simply how the world works, the natural order of things. The divine and mortal realms are not separate but interpenetrating, constantly affecting each other. As evening deepens and Marcus's family settles into their nighttime routine, the city outside transforms. Rome after dark is not the relatively safe, well-lit environment modern city dwellers take for granted. It's darker than you can easily imagine, the only illumination coming from the moon and stars if you're lucky, and scattered torches at major intersections, placed there by wealthy residents or by the authorities as a minimal public service. The narrow streets between insulae become canyons of shadow, dangerous, filled with threats. Crime flourishes in this darkness. Thieves and muggers, gangs of youths looking for trouble, even organized criminal enterprises operate with relative impunity. There is no police force in the modern sense, no organized law enforcement patrolling the streets, responding to calls for help. The vigiles, officially firefighters, do maintain a nighttime presence, but they're spread thin across a city of 1 million people, and their primary concern is fire prevention, not crime prevention. If you're attacked, you're largely on your own. Wealthy Romans deal with nighttime danger by simply avoiding it. They host their dinner parties and social gatherings in their homes or at the homes of friends, arriving before dark and staying until dawn if necessary. When they must move through the streets at night, they travel with entourages, slaves carrying torches to light the way and provide security through numbers, the implicit threat of violence deterring most opportunistic criminals. For the very wealthy, there are litters, essentially portable couches carried by slaves, allowing the passenger to travel in comfort while their bearers navigate the dangerous streets. Ordinary Romans like Marcus have no such luxuries. If they must go out after dark, they go armed, carrying a knife or a stout walking stick, and they go in groups whenever possible. Even so, they're vulnerable. Muggings are common, sometimes violent, occasionally fatal. There are stories, whispered in taverns and at the baths, of people who left home after dark and simply disappeared. Their bodies found days later in alleys or not found at all. The Tiber gives up corpses regularly, victims of violence or accident or suicide. It's often impossible to tell which. So Romans stay home at night, barring their doors, securing shutters, keeping their families safe behind locked barriers. The streets empty. The temperature drops, especially in summer when the day's accumulated heat finally dissipates. The city's sounds change, the daytime cacophony replaced by a different acoustic signature. Dogs bark, fighting over scraps in the street. Cats yowl, defending territories or seeking mates. From taverns and popinae, those lower-class drinking establishments, comes occasional laughter, singing, sometimes the crash of breaking pottery and sounds of fighting. Someone's having a party, music and voices carrying far in the still night air. A baby cries, inconsolable, its mother's voice rising in frustration or perhaps desperation. Inside their apartment, Marcus and his family find relative safety. The door is barred, a heavy wooden beam dropped into brackets that make forced entry difficult, though not impossible. The single window is shuttered. A small oil lamp provides minimal light, its flame just bright enough to navigate by, not bright enough to banish the shadows that crowd the corners. The lamp's oil, expensive, is used sparingly, and soon even this minimal light will be extinguished. Darkness complete except for whatever moonlight filters through gaps in the shutters. Sleep in an insula is never entirely peaceful. The building creaks and settles, old wood flexing, joints relaxing. From other apartments come all the sounds of human habitation. Snoring, coughing, the murmur of late-night conversations, occasional cries of pleasure or pain. The walls are thin, privacy non-existent. You hear your neighbors' lives, they hear yours, an enforced intimacy that breeds both community and resentment. Everyone knows everyone else's business, secrets impossible to keep in such close quarters. Despite the noise, the discomfort, the dangers both immediate and potential, sleep comes. Physical exhaustion demands it, and the body, remarkably adaptable, learns to ignore what it cannot change. Marcus lies on his hard mattress, Lucia warm beside him, their children's breathing audible across the room. Tomorrow will bring another cycle, dawn breaking over Rome, the city stirring to life, work and commerce and all the rest. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, this night, is for rest. And that's the day, from pre-dawn awakening to nighttime sleep, the ordinary life of an ordinary Roman citizen. It's not glamorous, not the stuff of legends and epic poems. There are no conquests, no grand deeds, no moments of transcendent glory. Just work and family, commerce and community, the small daily struggles and minor triumphs that constitute most human lives regardless of era or empire. Marcus is not unique, not special, which is precisely what makes his story valuable. He represents millions, the vast majority of Romans who built and maintained the empire through their collective labor, whose names appear in no histories, but whose lives made history possible. Rome endures in our imagination as a place of emperors and senators, gladiators and conquests, marble temples and mighty aqueducts. And those things are real, certainly architectural and political achievements that shaped Western civilization. But the foundation of Rome, the bedrock upon which everything else rests, is people like Marcus. The shopkeepers and artisans, farmers and slaves, the countless individuals who rose each morning and went about their business, who raised families and paid taxes, who worshipped gods and gossiped at the baths, who lived and died in relative obscurity, but whose aggregate existence was the empire itself. Understanding their lives, these ordinary Romans, gives us a different perspective on history. It reminds us that behind every monument is a workforce, behind every law is an affected population, behind every triumph is a tax bill. The grand narrative of Rome's rise and fall is fundamentally a story about people, about how they organized themselves, how they survived and thrived or suffered and failed, how they created meaning and community in a world that could be brutally indifferent. Marcus's day, repeated with variations across Rome and throughout the empire, is the invisible engine of civilization. Each small transaction in his shop contributes to commerce. Each prayer at his household shrine reinforces religious practice. Each meal with his family strengthens social bonds. Each visit to the baths maintains public health and social networks. Individually, these acts seem trivial, hardly worth recording. Collectively, they constitute society itself, the web of habits and rituals, obligations and relationships that allow 1 million people to live together in relative peace and prosperity. The challenges Marcus faces are timeless, even as their specific manifestations are uniquely Roman. The struggle to make a living, to provide for family, to find meaning in daily routine, these are universal human concerns. The fear of fire and crime, the navigation of social hierarchies, the balance between work and leisure, public duty and private desire, all of these resonate across centuries. We are not so different from these ancient Romans, not in the things that matter most. We still seek connection, security, purpose. We still love our families, worry about money, complain about politicians. We still find joy in simple pleasures, good food, warm baths, conversation with friends. Rome fascinates us because it's both familiar and foreign, recognizably human, yet operating according to rules and customs that seem strange. A society that valued oratory as much as military might, that built massive public works for the common good while accepting slavery as natural and necessary. That achieved remarkable engineering feats, but whose medicine was barely effective. That produced profound philosophy and poetry alongside brutal entertainment in the arena. These contradictions don't diminish Rome, they make it more interesting, more complex, more real. If you've made it this far through our day with Marcus, through the crowds and shops and baths of ancient Rome, I hope you've gained not just information, but perhaps a sense of connection across time. These people lived, really lived, their joys and sorrows as real to them as yours are to you. Their city, for all its differences from our modern world, was a place of human drama, comedy, tragedy, the full spectrum of experience. When you see ruins now, perhaps you'll imagine them alive, filled with the Marcuses of Rome going about their daily business. When you read about emperors and battles, perhaps you'll remember the millions of ordinary citizens whose lives provided the context for those events. Before we part ways, if you enjoyed this journey to ancient Rome, if you found value in this glimpse of ordinary life in an extraordinary time, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these deep dives into history possible and helps ensure we can continue exploring the daily lives of people from various eras and cultures. Share your thoughts in the comments. What surprised you most about Roman daily life? What aspects would you find most challenging? What, if anything, do you think we've lost from that ancient way of living? The conversation continues beyond the video, and I'd love to hear your perspectives. Until next time, thank you for spending this day in ancient Rome with me. May your own days, whether in Sydney or Seattle, Sao Paulo or Shanghai, be filled with the same simple satisfactions that Marcus knew. Meaningful work, good food, warm baths, and the company of people you love. History reminds us that while times change, human needs and desires remain remarkably constant. We are all, in the end, just trying to live good lives, to care for our families, to find our place in our communities. The Romans understood this, and in understanding them, perhaps we understand ourselves a little better too. Good night and safe travels through time.